made a difference. Thank you very much. So we've talked about high level, how AI is being adopted in vet clinics and so on. I'm really surprised with the results of the poll. I'm actually very pleasantly surprised, but I'd love to see a show of hands. How many of you here actually work in a vet practice or are practicing vets? Can I have a show of hands? Okay. All right. So maybe a minority. So maybe I'm just speculating that the polls was a wishful thinking, and I hope that I'm proven wrong. So let's deep dive into that. So vet care is all about compassion, care for animals, and yet it's been really tough for our vets. They're getting burned out, administration overload, too much soap notes to compile, and so on. So it's been a very tough time. So here we really want to talk about, is AI really the superhero that's going to help our vets, or is it the villain lurking in our PMSs? And whether it is really something that's going to save our vets time, or is it just going to complicate their lives further with all the things that they've got? So I'd love to ask you, Ollie, since we've not heard very much about what you do. Maybe you can give us a small introduction of what you do, and then we can deep dive into this question about the use of AI in clinics.
Yeah, sounds good. It's fine, working? Yeah, okay, wonderful. So I'm Ollie, I'm a vet, I'm also a software engineer, and I'm a co-founder at HelloVet, which is a London-based startup that's venture-backed and is trying to treat pets and people better. We do that through a very differentiated physical offering, so we keep pets and owners together through things like surgical procedures. We've got loads of glass and transparency, but we also use a lot of technology and a lot of AI on a daily basis. I think a key thing for us is how we use it within the clinical workflows. So rather than in sort of snippets, it's more how can we look at the entire clinical journeys and interactions and use technology to improve those. But going to your question about is AI the hero or the villain? I mean, I think it's undoubtedly got an opportunity to do both, but I think we're probably quite biased, everyone here probably as well, that it's got a massive positive role that it can play, and we certainly see it really positive in the practice that we're doing. But as with everything, it's about how you use it, where you use it, responsible use, and I think particularly understanding where it works well and what the limitations are. And that is, for veterinary clinicians, and say I'm a veterinary surgeon as well, it is really understanding that it is a tool that has pros and cons and weaknesses and strengths, and understanding what they are. I think we're primarily talking about LLMs here. There's obviously other uses of AI, the machine learning, machine vision bits that we use as well, but primarily thinking about LLMs, it's understanding where their fallibilities lie. They are a bit sycophantic. If anyone's used, kind of ChatGPT, you know that sometimes it just tells you you're a wonderful person and correct, even if you ask it something that's clearly wrong. And they are, occasionally prone to hallucination. But the tooling's got so much better, and people like Yannick and others are developing much more complex ways of using it. It's not like ChatGPT, where you might just sort of one shot ask it a question and that's the end. You can have much more complex pipelines which are going through multiple steps of AI. The end user doesn't see that, but you end up with a much more robust answer. But still, understanding those pros and cons is what allows us to choose where it's appropriate.
So, in all honesty, is AI commonly used in vet clinics today, Yannick? How common, or is it still early days?
I think both are true. I think it's still very much early days, but I think it's also very commonly used. I mean, again, I think taking North America as an example, because I think it is probably the most, the place where it's most used. We know that there's tens of thousands of veterinarians today using tools like ours, helping them with automating their records and with other types of administrative tasks. So those are very real impacts. Some of the groups that we work with they've seen an incredible reduction in burnout, reduction in turnover. They've seen increase in staff satisfaction. They've seen increase in client satisfaction as well.
Is that mainly in the US? What about Europe?
Yeah, and so it's coming in Europe. We're seeing it in early days. I think some of the concerns, we've spoken about data and other things. Things take more time to happen in Europe.
Right.
I think that's always been the case. I think we all know that. But it's happening as well.
And so where are the first signs of adoption of AI? Where do you see it? Is it in diagnostics? Is it in administration? Is it in client flow, workflow?
I see diagnostics as obviously, diagnostics I think is coming. Imaging was kind of some of the AI imaging stuff was years ago with some of the first usage of technology in AI. What we're really seeing this wave now is mainly around administrative tasks. And I think one of the benefit there is it's relatively low risk, and I think that's why it's such a nice first use case, right? Because when you start going into clinical decision support, it obviously opens up a whole new spectrum of risk. It's a very different type of risk profile compared to just clinical documentation and helping the veterinarian ultimately just gain some of that time back. So I think that's what we're seeing today as being the major kind of impetus for why larger groups and veterinarians are really actively seeking out these kinds of technologies.
And Ollie, I think you're a vet. You've got this whole chain of really cool and modern vet clinics. Trying to prove that using technology doesn't make clinics cold and clinical, but it can also be enjoyable. And I think you say, we want everybody to be enjoying their work in the vet clinic. Do you have any surprises when you look at the uptake in the veterinary field compared to the other healthcare sectors, and in human health, for example?
I mean, I know my sector better than theirs, but I think I think one of the surprises is actually how on board the teams are. And I think kind of Yannick said this earlier, right? That actually the adoption is often from ground up. The number of people who just use AI in their day-to-day life. I mean, you can't do a Google search now without some generative response coming up. So people are much more engaged with it. In fact, I suspect far more clinical teams are using it than are using it in a professional capacity, or at least are using it unofficially for professional use, rather than it kind of being something brought in by those in charge. So I actually think that people are really willing to engage if you do it. Just one thing I think is interesting is this idea of saving time, and I think that they absolutely can save time. A big reason why we use them. The question is what you then do with that spare time. And if it is just filled with more clinical cases, you are not going to reduce burnout. I think it's actually much more about how we can use that time in ways that allow clinical teams to have more sustainable careers.
So that's great context. So coming into real life use, everyday use. Yannick, has there been any surprises you've seen in your clinics using AI? Was there something that kind of shocked you or wowed you?
I think the kind of side effect benefit of the impact on the client experience has been interesting for us. We developed these tools really aimed at the vets, allowing them to save time because they can record the consultation and they get admin work generated. But the side effect there is that the veterinarian suddenly gets that kind of lift taken off their shoulder, and so during the consultation, they're present with the client, they're engaging with them, they're not taking notes. The client goes home with better documentation as well. And so there's been a general really good uptake on the client side of the experience. And I think that wasn't necessarily what we initially thought, but it's been often now what we're hearing is that is one of the major benefits as well. And so I think that for me was a pretty surprising one. Alongside, again, I think the eagerness of adoption. We often hear in this space, and I hear this multiple times every single week, vets are so resistant to change. It's so hard to get them to change. And it's funny because our experience has not at all been that. And my take on it is they're resistant to change when you're trying to put tools on them that are hard to use, that force them to adapt, that aren't working that well. That's when they're resistant to change. But actually, if you give them tools that mean they don't really need to change the way they practice, but it saves them an hour every day, I haven't seen a single vet that was resistant to that kind of change.
But certainly there's a learning curve, I imagine, for them to be able to use that and to have that credibility and trust in the system.
Yeah, there is, but I think there's a low barrier to entry compared to other tools. Again, there's no migration needed, there's less of that. So you can start using it in your first consultation the next day, and you start playing with it, right? You see the results, you gain some trust, and then you start adopting it more widely. So I think there's a natural curve, which is pretty nice.
All right, very good. And what about you, Ollie? Any surprises when you've got your clinics using AI? And
a lot of the AI we use is kind of human in the loop. So we'll have a human kind of checking outputs and doing things. And I guess the surprise for me was how easy it is when you're using AI for the human to turn their brain off and to actually just kind of wave everything through. And it's actually quite a difficult challenge when you have AI that is really good, not perfect, but you want a kind of human to have some engagement with it. It's actually really difficult because they get so used to it being so good that they actually often don't spot the times when it isn't, which is the whole point of having a human in the loop. And I think that's quite a challenge because even on the scribe side, you always got the option of the full transcription and going back to it, but it's really hard to ever spend the time to work out whether the output matches the reality because they are so nearly perfect, but they're not perfect.
Okay. Well, I'm sure this is going to be a very biased answer. I'm going to ask the audience if you think that the AI tools that are being used will save vets time. Do you think that they will save vets for an hour a day using AI? Show of hands if you believe that this will save vets time. Is that the majority? Yeah, maybe a biased audience, but I think the direction is directional. I think we do think that AI will save you time. That's very good. So with all innovation and so on, there are obviously challenges, obstacles, and I'd like to ask you, what were the main obstacles you found when you were actually trying to implement AI and making vets' lives easier? What was the biggest obstacle you had to face? Yeah. Ollie, sorry. We embed the AI into our workflows. So I think that actually we haven't faced a huge number of obstacles. I think that the challenge is where it is siloed and totally separate. So I think that is a real challenge. If you take people out of their standard workflow, if you try and get clinical teams to do things that they wouldn't do normally, you are just swimming upstream. It's a nightmare. But if you can actually embed it within what they're doing anyway, then we've seen really good outcomes. I guess the other challenge, as I said, is that reliability of output and trying to have that kind of level of human oversight without creating just even more work has been a challenge. Right. And Yannick, have you seen any resistance around the job roles or workflows? And changes, and you mentioned some of that.
Yeah, I think the veterinarians themselves not much. I think they really see the net benefit pretty easily. I think some of the nurses or technicians, there are sometimes definitely questions that come up there. Today helping with that admin work is sometimes part of their role as well. So there's some questions of, hey, what does that mean? We see a ton of opportunity there. They're spending a lot of time doing that, but it's not like there isn't a lot of other work that they could be doing that is much more valuable. And so I think a lot of that framing is in, hey, it's going to allow you to just do more valuable work, whether that is, with the client, whether that is on like helping improve other types of workflow. So I think it's really about framing those things correctly. But generally, again, as I mentioned, I think we've been very surprised by how open, all clinicians are to these kinds of tools, because I think it's the sense of burnout and just the super high caseload is pretty universal.
And if there's any resistance at all, would it come maybe from staff or from clients?
Definitely not from clients. I think that's a thing where we've seen like virtually zero resistance. I think they're very used to it. They're starting to see it in their own, when they go to the doctor, their doctors are using AI for things. And I think we're lucky in that sense in the vet space that there's less of a barrier, as we mentioned, right? It's ultimately about the pet, so there's a bit less of a privacy concern as well than if it's your own story that's being recorded. So we haven't seen any resistance from the clients. They're quite happy actually.
Okay.
They get more documentation to go home with. That's better, so they don't get told
They like
the next day. Yeah, it's nice for them. So definitely not on that side, and pretty little on the staff side as well.
So I'm going to be a little provocative now, and I'm just going to ask you: does AI risk vets being data managers rather than being clinicians, Ollie?
I think at the moment, the responsibility and the regulatory responsibility still just lies with the vet. I think there are some questions on that, particularly as we move to more sort of agentic AI, like where that responsibility will lie and who's doing what. But I think that there's an art to veterinary medicine. I think that is hard to replicate, and I think that the client relationships are so important, and that is, at least for the time being, not going to be replaced by the AI anytime soon.
Okay. And Yannick, what's the biggest opportunity you feel and risk for AI in practice?
I think, I can start with the risk. I think definitely on the implementation side, making sure that especially as these tools are now going into further things than just the admin side, right? We're starting to talk about clinical decision support, really ensuring that you're using systems that are properly built for those use cases, that have, that are using source data, that can really show you why they're making certain, certain diagnostic recommendations.
Transparency.
The transparency side is key. I think the opportunities are very clear. I think there is, everybody knows, you look at the P&L of the clinic, the line on staff labor cost is your biggest line, and any opportunity that's possible to make that more efficient is going to help our clinics, and then on the flip side, it's going to help clients, and it's going to help the patients as well. So I think the opportunities are pretty endless.
And if so, notes are actually drafted by AI, who is liable for the data? Is it the algorithm? Is it the company? Is it the vet?
It's definitely the veterinarian. And I think it's very important. We built, and it's important in the software that's built. Like it's always, you're drafting something for the vet. But the vet needs to approve it, the vet needs to read it, and I think it's a key part in how we're educating about these tools as well. Like to Ollie's point, it's not supposed to be something that you just completely, you don't even look at it and you send it through. It is 100% still, whether that's on the regulatory side, but even on the conceptual side in the vet space, it's really important that it still goes through that step every single time.
And Ollie, if there's one thing that AI cannot replace, what is it?
Well, I'm going to go back to that client relationship piece and that, kind of hands on the pet and, knowing the clients, knowing the patients and that human touch without being too trite about it. But I think what Yannick just said again is, this idea that the vet's ultimately responsible, I think is really, really important. But it is really, really difficult. Like I said to your previous question, when the AI is so good so often, it is really hard to engage your brain. I mean, I use it from a software engineering standpoint as well, and you can just let the AI do its thing, and that's got much lower, kind of challenges than on the veterinary side, and it's really, really hard sometimes to turn back on. And I think that's a skill that people are going to have to learn. To really know when they have to kind of engage and in which bits they have to engage, because ultimately the responsibility lies with the clinician.
Amazing. So let's end with, what's your top advice for clinics wanting to implement AI? So Yannick.
My advice, and I think what we've seen is...
Okay, man.
I didn't say it either. I think it's starting with something. I think there's a lot of groups that are taking 8 months to think about what can a pilot look like. Let's think about the frameworks and the things, and I think you're just missing out on so much immediate opportunity. And starting out can mean pick 5 vets in your group that are willing to try these out and start gathering feedback from them and start spreading it out that way, because you're going to start seeing internal champions that are going to emerge, and those are going to be the best people for you.
The influencers.
Scale it up within, those are, those for us have been the most successful rollouts, have been using those influencers. It hasn't been top-down driven, hey, everybody needs to start using this today. So I think start with something small, but start tomorrow. Try to make that challenge, because otherwise you're still going to be stuck in 6 months thinking about a pilot.
And what about you, Ollie? What's the top advice?
I think it's very, very similar. I think I talked before about how having siloed information and these tools being siloed is a bad thing, and it is, but actually it can be a good thing for running a pilot. So actually you don't have to have perfect integration, you don't have to have perfect everything. You can just take a small group of people and get them to engage and try lots of tools. So as wonderful as Covet is, there's loads of tools out there, and for different purposes, right? Whether it's also something on the imaging side, just try them at small scale. They don't have to be fully integrated, and find what works for you, your team, and your workflows.
Amazing. Do we have time for 1 or 2 questions, Fiona?
Yes, sorry, we do.
Yeah. Does anybody want to ask a question? Yes, Amina. Go ahead.
Without mic?
Oh, the mic is going to arrive, I think.
I'm going to run.
You need a mic.
Indeed. Thank you.
It's kind of difficult to see you with this thing, with this light glaring into eyes.
I have a question about the adoption. So you spoke about the adoption, that there are no challenges, which is good news, but I wonder if you notice any barriers depending on the age of the vet, or depending on the experience of the vet. Let's say the ones that are early career developer, at the early career stage, the mid or senior. Just curious to hear if there is any difference or any challenges.
No, you go.
So just to be clear, there are definitely challenges, right? I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying there's relatively low compared to what people expected, I think. One of my surprises, I didn't answer this before, but is how many later stage career vets have very successfully adopted these. We have people that were a year or two away from retirement that literally tell us, hey, I was going to stop practicing next year, but actually I'm going to continue longer now because of a tool like this, because it's allowing me to do what I like again. And often they're the people that hate the paperwork the most. And so we've been surprised. I think a lot of it comes down to how easy you make these tools to adopt. Definitely the younger generation embraces it even easier and even more. So there's a bit more guidance needed with some people that are less savvy around technology. But I think these tools and how they've been built they're very low friction. You don't need to change a lot of workflows, and so they're actually very suited to kind of all stages of vets.
Thank you. Any other questions?
There's one more question over there.
Thanks guys. Ollie and I are doing similar things. I'd be interested to know if he's had the same thing, that a couple of our vets are very reluctant to use AI Scribe based on the sustainability and the energy usage that they perceive it's creating. And also I'm interested to know both your thoughts on whether the ease of adoption is more from owners, because that perceived saving of time doesn't necessarily give an advantage to the individual practitioners, because they may perceive that puts pressure on them to do more.
Right, interesting.
Yeah, I think to the question about whether they do more, I think that is like really, really interesting, and I think it is very much how the business implementing it does it. I think just trying to condense your consultation time and just putting more consultations in is not going to be sustainable for anyone. So. I think that's true. There was a paper in the US, I think, that was actually looking at that, where they were analysing in human medics around use of scribes and burnout kind of rates, self-reported kind of burnout measures. So I think absolutely, how you use it's important. In terms of adoption, also interestingly, we don't use an AI scribe currently yet, day to day. I have reasons for that, which I'm not necessarily going to go into straight away, although we are kind of assessing. A lot of our AI is small models individually doing kind of workflow-based tasks. They are fairly small and lightweight. I haven't had anybody come up with those arguments. I've seen those arguments, online around energy usage. I'm not as bought into the arguments as some. I mean, a huge amount of that energy requirement is actually in training the models rather than the actual incremental use of tokens. I know that there's been a whole bunch of things debunked about water usage as well recently. So, I think there's question marks on how accurate that data is. But I certainly haven't had resistance from that. I think in the grand scheme of things, if you are saving in other ways through that efficiency, it will sort of net itself out. But Yannick, maybe you've got...
Yeah, no, I think to the first point, what we're seeing a lot is you can save them sometimes between, but it's not necessarily that it means that during that day itself they're going to be able to save a lot. But often they're doing their notes at night, they're doing their notes on the weekend, and that's a lot of the time that you're taking away. Honestly, you can ask a lot of your vets, they're probably doing notes away from the clinic at the end of the day. And so allowing them to get home a bit earlier, allowing them to not work on a Saturday, those are very clear benefits. And in the best of worlds, you can maybe see one extra vet in the day and you can save that time, and so there's a bit of a win-win, right? So that's for that side. I think on the energy side, I think Ollie really summarized the 2 points. I think there's obviously legitimate concerns around usage of electricity, which is always the case with new technology. A lot of the question is, what does that technology allow you to then do in terms of other time savings, as you mentioned? And if saving an hour a day, say using this, means that maybe you don't take your car to go somewhere else because you can walk, that's going to be a much bigger impact. So it's always hard for people to think about it that way. I think the other thing is that there's incredible efficiency gains happening today on the training side, because a company like Google training a model, it costs them billions of dollars literally because of the energy. And so for them, if they can reduce that by half, it's going to be cost savings. Their latest model training run compared to last year was 33 times more efficient. And so they're directly incentivized to get there as well. So that's why I think it's good, because everybody's on the same train. They want to save money as well. So I think we're definitely trending in the right direction there.
Excellent. We've got time for one more question, if there is one. Sorry. I'm going with the closed option.
Thank you very much. Really insightful. I wanted to know from your experience working with pet owners, how's been your experience when they know that some of the diagnostic tools are probably AI driven? And also from the companies that potentially use your services, how many of those have AI policy? Is that something that you encourage them to adopt?
So I'll let Ollie answer on the diagnostic side, because he's definitely better suited than me. I think on the AI policy side, I think we see a very varying degrees here depending on the kind of maturity and size of the organizations. A lot of the large organizations that we work with, we have had to go through very rigorous kind of processes around data and AI and security. So that's why we have to be SOC 2 compliant. We have to be GDPR compliant. So those things are very important. I think what we saw a slide before that was presented around which organizations are moving the fastest, and I thought it was an extremely accurate slide. The kind of 10 to 30, 40 practice groups are really the ones that are making like the most of all of this today. We're seeing them adopting very fast. We're seeing them being able to push down policy also faster. And so they're not necessarily as focused on the policy side of things and really thinking about that as much, but they feel they're in a position they can do that. So there's always an interesting trade-off between those two.
On the diagnostic side, we use routinely on all X-rays. We'll go through an AI analysis. But I guess, like I was saying earlier, the responsibility still lies with the clinician. The clinician's making the ultimate diagnosis, and so we don't actually explicitly tell people that we're using AI within that as an aid. What we do an awful lot of with AI is almost like kind of like translation of data, so and text, which it's really good at. So how can we summarize information, but also how can we turn information from kind of complex medical language into layperson understandable language? And again, in that sense, I don't feel like there is an onus on us to explain that AI was used through that, particularly because we have a human in the loop. But I'd say the feedback is immensely positive when people consume that kind of information, because they are thirsty for information. They will get it from somewhere, if not from us, and us being able to provide it quickly and efficiently is the best way from a trusted source. So I think actually, we've had almost no feedback that's been negative on that AI side. I think we'll get very interesting when we start to talk about voice agents and where people might start to interact with voice, and the voice is getting so good. If you weren't very clear that was AI, I think that there's a trust risk there. But for the moment, on the text-based stuff and actually diagnostic imaging, we've not been explicit and not had problems.
Right. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. And maybe next year there will be another industry that's going to pop up: carbon offsets for vet clinics using AI. So let's look at the space. So thank you very much. I think we've heard today that AI isn't here to replace vets. It's here to remove friction and to do the heavy lifting while vets really do the job that they love. And the takeaway is to start small, stay curious, but do it, right? Thank you so much.
Thank you.